Welcome to a really exciting conversation, the fourth step on our pilgrimage. And we're going to France, where we are opening to, it might be the most powerful, the most terrifying, the most surprising story of the return of the witches, the Cathars. Because, as you're about to hear from their champion and story bearer, Veronique Flayol in France, the Catholic Church, who is the bad guy all along this pilgrimage, over and over and over again, really focused all their attention on destroying not a woman, not a town, an entire religion, an entire community, men, women, and children. And you may not really know that much about them, the Cathars. And I can't tell you exactly why, but from the beginning, as these 13, I knew it had to be 13, and Joan of Arc made it really clear she's not one of the 13. She's leading the pilgrimage. This is her pilgrimage. So I guess it must have been Jeanne d'Arc whispering in my ear, because I don't really know that much about the Cathars. I know of the Cathars, but I can't say that I'd been a student. I didn't even have a book about them on my shelf. And I have a lot of books on my shelf, but somehow they were always on the list. And so I needed to follow my guidance to find someone who could champion the Cathars, who could bring a particular Cathar woman alive in our presence so that we can see her, feel her, learn both the traumatic story, which of course remains in our bodies. All 13 women, we are tracking what remains of the terror and the fear and the persecution in our bodies, because it's in our bodies. But even more important, what remains of the Cathar's beauty and wisdom and conviction. And I didn't know who that could be. So I went on a little hunt, and everyone I turned to said, you know, it's a great idea. It's a fabulous pilgrimage, but I'm not the best spokesperson. Why don't you ask so-and-so? So I'd ask so-and-so, and they'd look at the pilgrimage and say, oh, it's a fabulous idea. And yes, the Cathars have to be there, but I don't think I'm the perfect. It took 5 people to say, I know who the perfect person is, Veronique Flayol. And so on this bonus video, you're going to get to meet Veronique, find out about her loves, and I'm aware of 2 of them, Mary Magdalene and the Cathars. And we're going to hear her astonishing ancestral story. It's not an accident that she lives where she lives and teaches what she teaches. And then she's going to bring, now I took 1 semester of French in high school, so this is pretty bad. Dame Guiraude. I'll have her, Veronique, by the time we're finished, I will be able to say Dame Guiraude de Lauvaur a little better.
No, you did it perfectly.
I wanted to continue in French, but suddenly it wasn't offered. And it's one of the great regrets of my life that I never learned to speak French. But I think there's a pilgrimage to France coming. Therefore, I think it's time to get French lessons on my cell phone. So let us begin with prayer. The pilgrimage is about prayer. As a prayer artist, I'm about prayer. My days open with prayer. My days close with prayer. So, Veronique, would you, even before you introduce us to who you are and the Cathars, would you lead us in a prayer?
Yes, with great pleasure. And I have written this prayer thinking about the Cathars, of course, all the martyrs who died on the pyres, but especially also for Dame Guiraude, who resisted against the Catholic army during 37 days. And so this is a prayer I wrote. Our Lord, we give you thanks for your Son, Jesus Christ, who suffered the passion and died on the cross out of love for us. Following this beloved Son, women and men, Cathar martyrs, gave their lives out of love for you and out of fidelity to their beliefs. They died on the stakes to refuse to recant their faith. Dame Guiraude was a perfect example of resistance against the massacres perpetrated by the Latin Church. May they never be forgotten. Amen.
Amen. And that's such a theme. The queen of this pilgrimage, Joan of Arc, refused to recant. Marguerite Porret refused to take the oath of the Inquisition and absolutely refused to rescind her book, which she wrote for lay people in order to give them a mystical life outside the authority of the church. This resistance theme is a thread that runs in all of them. So thank you for your prayer that really is an umbrella for all of them. And that's a medicine that every one of them brings us to find in ourselves the strength, the conviction, and the courage to say no. No, I don't believe that. No, you can't treat me that way. No, that isn't what I'm going to do or say. And this is a conviction that women in particular have suffered for 3,000 years or more. So thank you for opening us with the prayer of resistance.
Yes.
So now we want to meet you. Even before we meet Dame Guiraude, would you tell us a little bit about you, your teachings, where you live?
Yes, so I'm very fortunate, and as you said, Janet, I'm I'm connected on the same time with Mary Magdalene and the Cathars, because that's Mary Magdalene searching and wanted to know more about what was her life when she arrived in Gaul. What was Gaul at this time, at the first century? I wanted to know more, and so little by little, Mary Magdalene leads me to the Cathar country. And of course, I had this idea and this desire to have more information. And little by little, I studied the Cathar history, and I go deeper and deeper. And I wanted to in fact, to meet this very specific society at this time in Middle Ages. And that's in fact the way I discover the Cathar and their history. So as far as I'm concerned, I was born here in Provence, so in south of France, close to the place where Mary Magdalene landed with her companions and began to do evangelizations of the region. So I have done a little presentation. Maybe I can share with you just to show you the place where I was born. So this is in fact, and maybe some people could discover this place. So this is a place called La Seine-Baume, and that's a place where, in fact, Mary Magdalene, it's a big mountain, a big range of mountain, and there is a grotto inside, and that's a place where Mary Magdalene, in this grotto, she spent the last 30 years of her life. After her mission of evangelization, she decided to retire herself in this mountain and to spend her time in this grotto. It's a beautiful place, full of energy, with the forest at the foot of the mountain. We have a forest dedicated to Artemis, so it's a very feminine place. So I live in a village very close to this mountain. So this is a view from the inside of the grotto, and we have a statue of Mary Magdalene here at the bottom of the grotto, and we can see that we have the pilgrims who come here to do their prayer, to light their candles. That's a place full of energy. That's, for me, the most beautiful place in the world. I could stay there for ages. And so the relics, this is the city where I live, in Saint-Maximin. It's called Saint-Maximin-la-Seine-Baume. And we have this basilica, which has been built at the 13th century, when the relics of Mary Magdalene have been discovered, because they have been hidden during the Saracens' invasion at the 8th century. And they have been discovered later. So we have our king decided to build this beautiful Gothic basilica, which is considered one of the most beautiful Gothic building in south of France, to shelter, in fact, the relics of Mary Magdalene. So we have here, they are kept inside the crypt underneath the basilica. And we have here, so they are usually the reliquary is just behind these gates you can see, and we take the reliquary off during the Magdalene's festival in July for 1 week. And the second picture is the picture of the reliquary with the skull of Mary Magdalene. Quite one of the unique relics that could be saved from the French Revolution. And so I have this very particular link with Mary Magdalene, because we have, with friends, a few decades ago, we have founded an association, and we are in charge to organize the Festival of Mary Magdalene, among other things, but to maintain also the Provençal tradition, but to organize in July this Festival of Mary Magdalene. And the picture on the top is the one of all my friends of the association. I'm the one in blue with the blue apron, so it's difficult to recognize me. But we so we have this very beautiful festival, and on the Sunday afternoon we carry the reliquary of Mary Magdalene. That's the second picture you can see. We carry it all around the city in procession. So that's a beautiful event. And it is done in the very specific tradition for 7 centuries now. So it's a very old tradition, and I have the privilege to be part of this since I think my 15. So it's a long for a long time.
And you told me the cutest thing about, to make this real, you now you did it in kilograms, but you said Mary Magdalene is heavy, 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 and your
Oh,
husband
yes.
is one of the, and then you said for a week he's black and blue.
Yes, the reliquary is 470 kilos. And so there are 4 men on each side to carry it. And so they do poses, because you can't go all along the city during more than 1 hour just carrying it like this. So we do pose, we pray, and then we go back, and they change also. So they turn over, because it's, and my husband, who also carries the reliquary, as his shoulder totally black for 1 week after the Sunday of the procession. Yes. Yes.
Well, some July, we want to be there.
It's in July, yes. It's a very, very beautiful moment. Yes.
Thank you so much for creating this.
You're
and
welcome.
You teach, alongside this bonus video, we'll make sure that people have links to you, your website, your upcoming events, because I know from watching a few of your classes that learning from you is a beautiful and a very holy experience.
Merci.
And so usually a person's story is, this is who I am, this is where I live. But when we first met, you did something that is very, my experience of it has been here in America, that this is how a Native American person introduces themselves to you. They don't say, I'm Joe Smith and I live in such and such a city. And the first time this happened, I was like, what? They immediately start saying, I am, and they say their name, the daughter of, and then they go back, maternal line, paternal line. It goes on. And as a oblivious American, I remember thinking, when are you going to start teaching? Why are we hearing this lineage? So now I understand how essential, how important, how holy. So when you told me the story of your great-great-grandfather, I felt like, oh, I remember this. This is the right way. This is the dead are alive in us, but by naming them, which is what this pilgrimage is all about, they come alive again. And you told a story. I was just, what? Please, would you share this lineage, your ancestral dead, because it's tied to the Black Madonnas. Would you tell everyone that story?
Yes, with pleasure. But first, I want to mention that this passion for Mary Magdalene, since I am a child, in fact, was transmitted to me by my father, because my father was really deeply in love with her. And, because he was with friends also, he did what we are doing now. And so I was with him when I was a child, and so I think that if I am so close from Mary Magdalene, if I consider her as a friend, I call her Mado. And so it's a kind name for her. And it's because it's thanks to my father. But my family, in fact, was from Italy, and we arrived here in France. We were, in fact, for the first migrants, we can say that, because in France, in Marseille, in 1720, we had a black plague, very terrible black plague. And at the end of the plague, Provence was totally destroyed and totally, in fact, people died, 2/3 of the population died. And we burned a lot because we didn't know how to fight against the plague at this time, and because after it has the vaccine has been discovered later, one century later. And so the French king asked to the Italian from the very close, in fact, from the border, they were living in the Alps mountain, close to France. They were totally dying, starving, because they were very poor. And they asked them if they wanted to come to Provence to repopulate the region, to rebuild the region. And in fact, they had privileges at this time. He gave them privileges. So my father's family decided to come to France, and that's how that's the explanation why I am here. I'm living here. And so my family arrived in 1747, yes, from Italy. Yes. So yeah, I have a little slide again, just to show you, because in fact, yes, this is this one. So this is in fact my grandfather and his family. They were living, in fact, in Marseille, and they were yes, before they came here in Saint-Maximin. But before, when he was a child, he was living in Marseille, and he was handicapped. He was born, he couldn't walk, and he was really unable to walk, and two of his brothers died because of that. It was illness they couldn't explain. And my great grandmother was very faithful, and she prayed. She went in this place called the Abbey of Saint Victor in Marseille, facing the old port. And she prayed the Black Madonna. There is a Black Madonna here in the crypt, kept in the crypt. And as a guide, because it's also a place linked to Mary Magdalene, I will explain you a little bit later. But as a guide, when I went there, every time I was there, I felt really something very strong and very special with this Black Madonna. And I wasn't able to understand why, in fact. And one day I told to my mother, oh, I was with a group in the Abbey of Saint Victor. And she said, oh, you see the Virgin of your grandfather. And say, what? And she told me the story about this Black Madonna who made this miracle for my grandfather, because my great grandmother went 2 times, in fact, to ask her to do something for my grandfather. And she said, if he can't be as a normal child and can't walk, please take him with you, and that's okay. Otherwise, please make him as a normal child, like all the others. And so the second time, when she came back home, my grandfather was on his legs and he was walking. He was 2 years old. And so that's a miracle. And I really understood why I was so in love, and what I was so close. Suddenly, you see it was so clear that I had this very special relationship with this Black Madonna. She's called Our Lady of Confession. Why Confession? Because in fact, this place you can see here has been carved on the rock, inside the rock, because this place where the abbey has been built was an old Roman quarry, and that's the place where Mary Magdalene, that's why we have the link to, that's the place where Mary Magdalene, the companions, and her brother Lazarus came to take refuge when they were in Marseille preaching, trying to convert the pagan to Christianity. They were hidden from the Roman army inside this place, and the column and the sculpture you can see on the column, it's the face of Lazarus, so Magdalene's brother, carved directly on the rock. And just down, we have a seat. We have a place with it's a stone, and it is called the seat of Lazarus, and that's the place where he was used to do the blessings for the former Christian. And at the very bottom of this place, we have a bas-relief. You can see it entirely, but you can see the skull. So, because we have a bas-relief representing Mary Magdalene with a skull inside the grotto of Saint Paul. So, the circle, we have this circle, in fact. So, everything is done here. So, yes, I'm going to stop the sharing. So, yes.
It's such a beautiful story. And I think
It is.
all the champions have a story like that they don't know why, but they're called, yes. They have a feeling they need to be in a particular place. And then later, the
links appeared. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's dive into the Cathars. Where do you want to begin? Do you want to talk about their story? How do you recommend because it's such a big story.
Yes.
How do we start?
Yeah. I really studied for a long time because we can read and hear many things about the Cathars, but and especially in the American or in English publishings, we have so many things, and some things are not really very true and are going on the way that the author wants to go. And so I had to study really to be close to history and to know more. And in fact, what we know, and this is very special in history, because this kind of things, I don't think it has happened very often, because all what we had, all what the Cathars have written, everything has been burnt. We don't have anything. We have only 3 codex. They are called codex. There are 3 books written by the Cathars that have been preserved from the fire, and they are kept in Lyon, in I think one in London and one in Germany, in Berlin. But otherwise, we have nothing. They have written 6,000 books, and only 3 left. Can you imagine that? So it's what we know from them, in fact, is all what we have from their enemies. When they were taken, they were prisoners, and they were under torture. They explained their life, and so that the sources we have are the sources of their enemies, of the Inquisition, from the Roman Catholic, and especially from the Dominican priests, because they were in charge by the Pope to do the Inquisition. So that's the only way to understand how they were living, what was their belief. So in fact, the Cathars were dualists. They were, in fact, they believe that they were 2 gods, in fact. The good God was the creator of the spiritual world, and there was another God who was bad, and he is the creator of this material world where we are living in. And the souls were put inside, we can say, envelopes, by the bad God, and thrown on the earth, ruled by him. And so they believe that the best place to go is to go to the good world, in fact, ruled by the good God. And this is the main difference, in fact, with the Catholic beliefs, the Roman Catholic beliefs. And in fact, this movement of Catharism appeared at the end of the 12th century from Northern Europe, and they went down in different places in a movement, crossing the Alps through Germany, through Austria, crossing the Alps. And then here in the Alps mountain, they shared. One part came to Italy because there was a very important community of Cathars in Italy who have been burnt as well later, but the same way as the one in France. And the other one went down to southwest of France and created this community close to Toulouse, to Narbonne, close to the Spanish border, in fact. And when at the very beginning, they were very small. It was a small community, and their belief was to live closer as possible as the very former Christian, as what Jesus taught to these people when he was alive. And in fact, they were following the Gnostic Gospels, the one who have not been recognized by the church. And also, but it's a very special gospel, and that's the one I really study because it's very interesting. It's the Gospel of John. And John has another vision, and especially on Mary Magdalene and Jesus. But he had a very special vision about, he wrote the gospel differently. And so they traveled, all these Cathars traveled, the one who preached, with the Gospel of John in a small bag here on their belt. And that's it was really their Bible, because in fact they didn't worship any symbols. They were really very close to the first teachings of at the origins, and when transmitted by Jesus, and they wanted to live very humbly, very simply. And so at the very beginning, when the community was very small, and they preached, in fact, in the local language, which was Occitan, and the language I also speak, transmitted by my father, and they were understandable by the faithful. They were not, because the Latin church was preaching in Latin and they were totally illiterate. They couldn't understand. And it was a way for them to master this population. And as soon as this Cathar priest arrived and preached in the local language, they could understand. And so they followed them on the same way. And little by little, this movement became more and more important. And at one point that, in fact, the Pope was informed about that, and he was frightened. He was afraid to lose his power. And he decided, because they became more and more important and took more places, and people, even the nobility, the nobles followed them, also the owners of lands, in fact, the lords of the lands, all the nobility in Southwest were favorable to this Cathar, and they were called bonshommes. And what was really very new is that the women were allowed to preach at the same level as men. And this was totally, you can imagine at this time in Middle Ages, at the 13th century, it was totally horrible for the Latin Church to consider that a woman could be able to be a priestess as men. And so it was also one of the reasons they decided to fight against them. because this religion was transmitted by men and women. Why? Because, as I said, the Cathar believes that, in fact, men and women were equal because they were the same soul, but in different envelopes, in different bodies. And that's why, in fact, they consider the women as the same level as them. So these women, in fact, what is really important also to understand is that they didn't have a lot of sacraments in the Latin Church. We have 7 sacraments. In the Catholic Church, there was only 1 sacrament, and this sacrament was used for everything. And it was very important. It was called the consalamentum, and the consalamentum was, in fact, the imposition of the hands on the head of the faithful. And with that, they were, in fact, they considered, they transmitted the Holy Spirit. The power of the Holy Spirit was transmitted through their hands to the head of to the body of the faithful, who asked for being forgiven, for being baptized, for instance, for being married, for being involved in the Cathar church, to become un bon homme or une bonne femme. And so this was really the only unique sacrament. And this was totally, the church was totally against that. And can you imagine that a man could deliver the consalamentum and forgive, but a woman can forgive? It was something they couldn't, they couldn't stand. So that's why, in fact, they decided, because they saw that the power of the church was in this place, was in between, and it was in danger, in fact, and couldn't master. They decided to begin this Albigensian crusade, which was unique because they already made crusades. They went on crusade with King Louis, Holy Louis. They went on crusade, but in Holy Lands. But it was a crusade in France against, in fact, because they were Christian, it was a crusade against Christians and a massacre of Christians. Because, in fact, they were really considered, they call them heretics, but they were Christian like them, but practicing in a different way. So it's very important to understand that before we begin with the story of Guiraude, because, in fact, they were in fact, it was also they have been killed, and from also political reasons, and for question of powers. The same as now, in fact. And if you realize, nothing has really changed, and we still have Christians or people who are dying for their faith even nowadays. So it was exactly the same. In fact, these people were living very simply, and for the one who were in the church of the Cathar, because they didn't recognize the power of the Pope. So you understand why he wanted to fight against them. And the most important level in the Catholic Church was bishop, in fact. But it was a place that women were not admitted to join, but they could be bonne femme, and they could deliver the consalamentum, but they couldn't become bishop. It was forbidden for them. But otherwise, they really they were living very, very simply, and this society was totally in peace, very peaceful, in fact. And they fight against them because of their belief, and because they were afraid to lose their power, to lose their money. Right. They wanted to have because when the Cathar was taken, put in jail and killed, they were allowed, the Pope and our French king said that they were allowed to take the goods of this family, the lands. And so they had to fight against these people in Southwest, our king, the French king, asked the lords of northern France, who were coming back from the Fourth Crusade, totally poor, because they put all the money in the crusade, and when they came back, they had no money anymore. And so this, of course, they were interested to come and to fight against the lords of south of France, because they were allowed by the Pope and the French king to take their lands when they take a Cathar family. And so that's one of the reasons.
Now I understand why. I didn't understand it intellectually, why the Cathars are essential. They have to be in this pilgrimage, but I understand it now. Because there's two stories here that repeat and repeat and repeat. Number one is women have to be controlled, kept small, silent, obey the man, obey the church, obey your husband. So there's that theme. I mean, it's this unbelievable horror, and yet I'm almost laughing and going, yeah, well, the Pope's going to kill those people. There's no way a woman can distribute the sacraments. A woman can be equal to a man. But then the second theme that you just said, the stealing of the land, follow the money. And let's look at when the Europeans came to the United States and South America and Canada. I mean, it's the whole Americas. What did they do? They stole an entire continent of land from the people who were living on it. They stole the land to then give to other white settlers. Look at slavery. They brought these people over and stole their value. So this theme of taking power away from women and stealing whatever people have is this is the theme.
Yes, if I can add to this, is they did it in the name of God. So
right.
It was
call you a heretic, right? Call you a witch
in the name of God.
Right, call you a savage.
Yeah.
And right, that we have to make you a good Christian. So we have to teach you the native peoples, the indigenous people. I read probably the most shocking thing about what was done to the native peoples here in the United States, that I had never heard it put so simply. And of course, I never heard this growing up in school. When the friars, and I think it's more Franciscans in the United States than the Dominicans, but whoever they are, the priests have come over here and they're going to convert the indigenous peoples. The first thing they did was to teach them to beat their children. A Native American, children were cherished. And somehow they make it in God's name, Jesus's name, Christianity's name, that you should beat your children. What? But in God's name, these are the horrors that have been inflicted. And the horror inflicted on the Cathars is simply, but we need to hear the story. I want to hear the story. I want to meet Dame Guiraude.
Yes.
I can see those vowels. Right?
You know what, Janet? Practice makes perfect. So the more you practice, the best you will become. The better you become.
So help us, why this woman? When I sent you an email and said, to represent all the Cathars, one woman, to represent all of the slaves in America, one woman, to represent it. So each one of these women carries a big story. Who's going to carry the story of the massacre of the witches in Germany? It's the von Menzenkamp family. Who's going to carry the story? So one woman is like a prism. We meet her and we hear her story, and somehow in hearing her story,
We know all
hear
story.
all our stories. We
Of
hear
course.
all the witches' stories. We hear all the Cathar stories. And you immediately said, oh, Dame Guiraude de Lauvaur. This really
Yeah.
has to be. So tell us about her and why she carries this story.
In fact, when you ask me who can embody all the women, all the Cathar women who died and who fight against the Catholic for their beliefs, yes, it comes yes to my mind this Dame Guiraude, because in fact many of them we have to, I have to be totally honest, in fact the Cathar religion has been transmitted probably more by the women than with the men. And in fact, these women were really, most of them, the one who became bonne femme, in fact, and not the one who were living ordinarily with their husband and so on, with family, but this bonne femme, where most of them were from the nobility, and they had a good education. And you know, this place in Southwest was very famous. It's a place where we had in Middle Ages what we call the courtly love, you know, with the troubadours. So these women were sung by the troubadours, they were emphasized by the troubadour, but in fact they were living very, very difficultly in very, you know, with difficult conditions, because they were in poems, in songs, in everything, but at the same time, this does not prevent them from being fought or being put apart, or, you know, they really, in fact, it is not because we had the courtly love that they had good conditions. And so at the very beginning, when the Cathar made their meetings, because they didn't have any church in the Cathar religion, where we had bonne femme and bonne homme, when we had the priest, we had a church. So the church can be anywhere when we had the groups. And so in fact, in 1167, in Lauragais, in Saint Felix of Lauragais, there was a council. And in this place, it is said in the archives that it is said exactly, a great multitude of men and women from the Church of Toulouse and other neighboring churches gathered there to receive the consolamentum. So to convert from Latin Church to this Cathar Church. Why? Because in fact, the noble women, they trained their husbands, their children, because they understood that with the Cathar beliefs, if they were converted, they could live a more independent life, because they were considered the same as the men. And so they decided, little by little, all the nobility converted to this religion of Cathars. And because they were very wealthy, they could have houses, they had castles, and they, especially the women, decided to make, it was the equivalent of the Catholic convents, but it was Cathars convent, in fact, and they welcomed these women, decided to have their own house, and in this house to welcome the women in difficulties, for instance, little orphans, for little girls who didn't have, the parents died, lost girls with children, or parents didn't want anymore. And so they really did good, and they provide works for them. Most of these places, and that's still nowadays the most important industry and incomes of the region, they were in fact making fabrics, and so making linen, and they were producing fabrics, and this is still nowadays one of the most important part of the economic system in this region. So they were really at the origin of that. And they welcome all these people, all these women, widows, and they really provide them works and education for the little girls. So they were very powerful. And so Dame Guiraude, in fact, her mother, Blanche of Lauvaur, Blanche had 5 children, and the most famous, 2 of them is Guiraude, so the girl, and her brother, who was also involved in the war, in the war, and he was Emmerich was also he resisted also to the Catholic Church, and so when Dame Blanche, the mother, decided to give all his good and all his her lands to her son Emmerich. And this family was really very, very powerful at this time, and they own a whole region with different places. We had Lauvaur, we had Laurac, and different places. They were very, very powerful, very wealthy. And Blanche decided to retire, and she founded 3 houses for Cathar women and sheltered them. And when she died, that's Guiraude who also did the same as her mother. And Guiraude was called the Heretica Pessima by the Latin Church. And if we translate this Latin word, but it is translated by the worst of heretics. So you can understand. And so this place of Lauvaur was also called by the Catholic Satan's Synagogue. So you imagine the place, how they were treated. Why? Because in fact, they sheltered these people who were martyred by the church. And so because they didn't know where to go, and because the Lauragais was totally invaded and taken by Simon de Montfort, was the leader of the Catholic, it was a lord, a soldier. So for the church, the Dominican church, it was Amaury, the bishop, not the bishop, the abbot of the Abbey of Sisteau in north of France. And for the army, it was Simon de Montfort. And they all gathered. And because they had taken all the region of Carcassonne, they decided to go further and to go to Lauragais, where this family of Guiraude was very powerful. And so they decided to take the city of Lauvaur. So Guiraude asked her brother to come, Emmerich, to defend the city, because all the Cathars were inside the city. It's a fortified place with walls and with rampart. We call that rampart in France. And so he came with 80 knights, 80 of his knights, to fight against Simon de Montfort. And they asked also the lord, the most important lord of Toulouse, to send some knights to help them to resist. So they could resist, in fact, 37 days of very, very intensive fights. And finally, the last day, a wall was made inside the ramparts, so the Catholic army could come inside. And it was the most important massacre. We've never had another one like this. 400, so all the population who was really inside the refuge, took refuge inside the city, of Lauvaur, they all have been taken and burned on a fire. So that's the most important stake we had in our French history. Even in Montségur, they were not as numerous as this. All the knights and Emmerich have been hanged, so tied up, you say, I think. They have been tied up on the square of the village. And Guiraude, so she had an awful death, but can you imagine, in the name of God, to do this? So she was naked, and she was put on. She was abused and put on a wheel, thrown on a wheel, naked, and they thrown stones to close the wheel. So she was. She died like this, and we have. There is in fact, there is we call this la canzone. It's a troubadour who, in fact, has written the story of this Albigensian crusade, and he said that he mentioned Dame Guiraude, that's why she's really very important. He mentioned her as someone very well educated. He said that she, in fact, she was in she is remembered as the Chatelaine of Lauvaur, remembered as a cultivated, even refined woman who loved to associate with scholars, mathematicians, Arab astrologers, and Jewish doctors. And you imagine that she was really open, he said, open, generous, deeply believing. She espoused the Cathar cause and protected the heretics of Vorey, and lodged the bonnes hommes and bonnes femmes refugees from Lauragais and Tarn, fleeing the destruction of Simon de Montfort's troops. So you imagine that he was not on the side of the Cathar, but he mentioned her. So it was really because she was really someone strong, and someone, however she was Catholic of Cathar, she is a powerful woman, yes.
And several of the women on the pilgrimage, some are unknown, unnamed, probably most of the people, both in the European witch craze, and especially when it comes over to the United States, we don't have the names of the slaves. We don't have the names of the Native Americans. Millions upon millions of them are unknown, unnamed, but they come alive through one of these women who is known and is named. So thank you to the troubadour, whoever you are, because I'm hearing this image of intelligent, articulate, well-educated, and I can just imagine how the Catholic Church is not going to allow, first of all, a woman, but a woman who is interested in science and astrology and mathematics, and is willing to sit down and learn from the wise and brilliant Jewish scholars of the time. So she was wealthy. She was, she has strong, I can feel her personality. She was generous and kind to bring in orphans. She does sound a little on the perfect side to me, but now they're making her into the worst of the worst of the worst. Now, as I listen to this, and this is one of the hard things in the pilgrimage, but why it's so important. When patriarchy is determined to pull you down, make you small, make you obey, even being wealthy, even having a castle, even having your PhD, a fabulous education, even having a wonderful family and lineage and nobility, even the community respecting you for the generous work and charity you do can't protect you.
No.
And this is incredibly hard to hear because we think, oh, but if I have a nice house, if I have a PhD, if I am the vice president of the corporation, if I protect myself this and this and this and this way, then I should be accepted. There's something happening right now that is a perfect example of this, that brings it into what you said. This is happening right now. Right now, as we make this recording, there is a woman, and forgive me because I wasn't planning on saying it for not having her picture and her name right in front of me, but she has been a professor at the University of North Carolina for quite a while. She is a published, she has very important books. So there's this incredibly well-educated journalist, I think several PhDs, Black woman, and she went through the process of requesting tenure, which is, I don't know that that word translates, but it means that you have a permanent position as a professor. And even though she checks off every box, published, fabulous teacher, loved by her students, famous journalist, check, 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 check. She was turned down for tenure, while white people who don't have all her credentials were elevated to tenure.
Mm.
This story is happening right now. And there it is, that the patriarchal power structure, no matter what we do, if it doesn't believe that a woman is equal, if it doesn't believe that a woman is deserving, then we can take your security away from you. So here, her story is 1167.
Oui.
And here we are, that's 1,000 years ago.
Yes.
And the story continues.
We still have to fight, yes. But I think, yeah, no, but I think, Janet, sorry, I speak in French, but it's really, I really appreciate what you do, because time is now. And we have to begin to realize that it has been for such a long time that we have been hurt, and we carry in our body all this pain, all these massacres we have to endure, we have to face, and time is now. And thanks to you, and I really appreciate you invited me to be on the part of this pilgrimage, because it's very important to let the voices of all these women who died in the past century, and I feel that we are their voices, and we have to testimony all their suffering, but they didn't suffer for nothing. They suffer because they transmitted us the strength to resist through the centuries, and time is now to say what we feel. I don't want to be fighting and to have this idea. I'm not fighting against men, but I think that we need in our society now to have this balance. As men need to have women, we need to have men as well. But we that's enough. We have suffered enough, and we have to tell that. And through all these 13 women you invite in your pilgrimage, we are able to transmit and to remember. Yes, so thank you for that.
I watched a class that you taught, and Kathleen McGowan said that I don't know if it was a famous saying, but there's something from the Cathars, that the Cathars, or at least this is how I picked it up listening, and she said it in Occitan, I remain. So I'm gonna look down at my notes and see if I can do this correctly. Dom Guiraude is alive. She remains, right?
Of course.
So if we want to do this work, and I do want to do this work to heal the trauma in my own body, in my relationships, I want to do that, and then contribute my part, whatever that may be, to building a world with that level of reverence, the image that we use in the painting. This is, the time is now to create a world of reverence, a reverence for the elderly, reverence for the children, reverence for all spiritual traditions, reverence for Mother Earth, reverence for food, reverence for sisterhood, reverence for everybody and everything. This is the hour of her return. So I'm deeply interested. Now, every single person can listen to these stories and hear what remains from Dame Guiraude, can hear what remains from Anarcha, can pick up what remains from Marguerite Porete. What a woman. So what do you feel of her is alive right now? What are her strengths, her powers? What would she like us to take into our beings and bring to life in order to create a world of equality and reverence? Now, I heard resist, and I'm taking that. Absolutely.
Yes.
I resist. What else are her highest? And yet she was humble. A queen, a lord, right? A lady, and yet generous, generous, kind, humble. There's a lot that remains of her that I want.
Yeah, and also I think this little light in her heart, to be able to, in fact, I think that she had this light in her heart, to welcome the people, to to take care of them, even if, of course, it was totally against the laws and the spirit of this time, but because I think she was elected. She was, in fact, she had the light of the Holy Spirit. She could transmit it through her hands, and so yes, she was enlightened. Yes, probably, and that's why she came through centuries, and she's still alive even now.
She is alive, and you're bringing her alive. And it's so thrilling to meet you and to meet her and to meet all the Cathars and to say yes to her medicine, her qualities, her strengths, resistance, humility. But I love the way it's all captured in the light in her heart.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So glorious. Oh, I could sit with you. And I know everyone is going to be very interested in your future events, courses, and some people could possibly come to France for some of your events.
Yes.
So your website, you send me anything to share with everyone that's watching.
Yes, I will send you the link on with my website. So I'm lecturer. Also, I have my official card from the ministry, the French Ministry of Culture. So I'm totally able to do guided tours. But what I really love to do is, because we have a wonderful region here with good wines and good food and plenty of beautiful places. But really what I like to do is to share my passion for Mary Magdalene, for the Cathar women when I am in southwest of France. And also because we follow Mary Magdalene from here, from the grotto to southwest, because as I explained, we have a link between them, between Magdalene is the thread, in fact, to these Cathar women who resisted. And so I would be very pleased, to, of course, to welcome all the people who want to discover these wonderful and beautiful places full of energies, and yes, and to share is really my passion. So of course, unfortunately, because we had 1 year where when we couldn't work, so I do also conferences, lectures, and workshops online, because of course I can't welcome people. But now it's quite finished. I think the things are getting better, and so we could travel again, and I would be very pleased to welcome anybody who wants to discover this place. Yes, thank you, Janet, for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about my business and my passion.
And thank you too for bringing the Cathars alive. They are alive.
With pleasure.
And they remain in us.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.